Chapter 3 Norseland. Once the questions were answered and news shared, Bregnest suggested that Alex go and check his saddle and gear that he had left in Telos.
Cherie will be in high spirits to see you again,
Bregnest added as Alex moved toward the door.
though your separation has been longer for you than for her.
Alex knew time ran differently in the world he had lived in for almost 16 years than it did here in the magical lands he had discovered. He wondered exactly how long it had been since he left Telos. When Alex entered the stables of the Golden Swan, a loud whinny welcomed him. Smiling, he walked over to a familiar silver-gray horse and started rubbing her neck. "Well, Cherie, it looks like you have been well cared for." Cherie snorted loudly and shook her head up and down in answer. Alex laughed and continued to rub the horse's neck. "Looks like we'll be off again soon. I hope you're ready for another adventure." Cherie nuzzled his shoulder, and Alex could feel her excitement to be on the road again. "I see Callisto did not say enough," a voice commented behind Alex. He turned around and saw Sindar standing at the stable door. "The two of you are close," Sindar went on as he crossed to stand by Alex. "Closer than any horse and man I have ever seen." "We have shared a lot," said Alex, turning back to Cherie, "and there is a great trust and understanding between us." "So I see, and I think Callisto must be right about you." "In what way?" "She told me that you were more like an elf than any human she had ever met," Sindar answered, reaching out and rubbing Cherie's forehead. "And she said that I would be lucky to go on an adventure with you." "How long has it been since you last spoke with Callisto?" "The new moon has appeared 5 times since I left the dark forest." "She showed our company great kindness," said Alex. "Myself most of all." "I have heard the story, though Callisto would not tell me everything that had passed between the two of you." Alex remained silent. "I will not ask you to tell me what she would not. It is not my place. I only thought it strange." "If you knew what happened, you would not think it so strange," said Alex, patting Cherie's neck and turning to go. "Already you learned to speak as a wizard." "Perhaps." A strange feeling suddenly came over Alex, and he stopped short at the door of the stable. His eyes moved to the crowded streets and buildings of Telos, searching for something he knew he would not find. "You felt it as well," Sindar whispered. "A feeling of being watched, of a watcher with purpose." "Yes." "It is gone now." "But what, or who, could it have been?" Alex questioned. "It wasn't just a feeling of being watched. It was something more. I just don't know what." "I think there is little danger," Sindar replied slowly. "The feeling is gone, and I felt no evil in it." Alex and Sindar returned to the Golden Swan, where they spent the rest of the day talking with the other members of the company. But Alex wasn't as enthusiastic as he had been. The strange feeling of being watched troubled him, and he couldn't seem to shake his unease. "How far is it to Oslinsk?" Alex asked. The company was sitting down to their feast, and Alex thought it would be a good idea to ask some questions. "Perhaps a week's ride," answered Andy. "It may take a bit longer, depending on the snow." "Snow?" "Spring is slow to come in Norseland," said Andy. "The snow was clearing when I rode to Telos a week ago, but we may still find some during our travels."
"I've heard that summers in Norseland are short,"
Halfton commented thoughtfully. "Not as short as stories tell," said Andy. "There are almost always 6 months without snow, and heavy winter lasts only for perhaps 3 months. "Though even the light part of winter in Norseland may seem heavy to us," commented Sindar.
"We should be fine,"
said Bregnest, standing and drawing everyone's attention.
"Tonight we seal our bargain, and our adventure begins. You are all experienced adventurers, so there is little I need to tell you. You all know what we seek, and you also know the rules of adventurers."
"We do,"
said Halfton, scowling at his empty mug. Bregnest smiled at Halfton.
I know how great your thirst can be, and I would not wish to keep you from quenching it."
"I beg your pardon,"
replied Halfton in an overly serious tone.
"There are a few things I do need to say, however," Bregness continued. "The first is that we will buy most of our provisions when we reach Oslinsk. If anyone is looking for a new adventure to start, they will certainly keep an eye on the shops here in Telos. I don't know if anyone will be looking for us, but it is always better to be a little careful early than to be very sorry later."
"There's wisdom in that," Val commented with a nod.
"You all know that we are in a race against time, but this race is not a sprint," Bregnest went on. "We have some time, and we will not go charging off wildly to reach our goal. When I left Alusha, the harvest was about to start. Fall and winter are wet, muddy months, and the ground often freezes. Winter is never a good time to go to war, so I believe we will have at least 8 months before any real trouble starts in Alusha. With luck, we will find success, and the Horn, quickly. Finally, as some of you know, Master Taylor carries several lost bags from his last adventure. We will make time for him to return one of those bags as we travel in Norseland. I believe the heir to the bag lives near our planned course of travel, so this should not be an inconvenience to us, or cause any great delay. And so, we will drink to our agreement, our adventure, and for luck."
Bregnest rang a golden bell that was sitting on the table. At the sound of the bell, servants entered the room, filled mugs for the company, and then departed.
"To the agreement, the adventure, and for luck,"
Bregnest repeated, lifting his mug.
"The agreement, the adventure, and for luck."
The others stood and lifted their mugs as well.
"Now, let's eat,"
said Bregnest, ringing the bell once more.
"We will depart at daybreak and begin our adventure."
With the second ringing of the bell, more servants arrived, bringing large platters of roasted meats, bowls of vegetables and gravy, and everything else the company might want. They ate and talked and even told a few stories about past adventures. Alex was soon pleasantly full, but to his surprise, Val continued to eat like a starving man.
"Can't see where you're putting it all,"
Halfton commented after pushing his own plate away.
"Never seen anyone eat so much at one time."
"You sound like my wife," Val joked. "She always comments on how much I eat, and then complains that I don't ever gain weight. She says my being so skinny makes her look bad." They all laughed at Val's words, and after some time, Bregness suggested that they should all go to bed.
"Sleep well, my friends,"
said Bregnest as he opened the door to the room he was sharing with Val.
"We may be in a rush to finish our adventure, but I hope we have many happy times in front of us, and little danger."
As Alex climbed into his own bed, he noticed that Sindar was simply lying on top of the covers. "May I ask you something?" Alex questioned. "Certainly," said Sindar, rolling onto his side so he could look at Alex. "Well, I was thinking about my friend Archon, and a question I never asked him. I don't ever remember seeing him sleep, and I was wondering if elves ever sleep, or if you don't need to." "We can sleep," said Sindar. "We remain watchful and alert, but our minds rest. And remembering things long past is like sleep for us." "Oh," said Alex, pulling his blankets around him. "So you don't dream?" "We dream as well. I suppose I should have said that we do not sleep like men, and that men may not consider our rest to be sleep." "That sounds like an elf reply," said Alex. "Thank you for telling me." "Not at all." Alex put out the lamp next to his bed and closed his eyes. Sindar started humming softly in the darkness. It was a pleasant tune, one that Alex had never heard before, and he soon fell asleep listening to it. Before sunrise the next morning, Alex and Sindar made their way to the company's private dining room. Bregnest and Val were already there, eating. Halfton and Andy turned up shortly after Alex and Sindar sat down. There was little talk as they ate, and as soon as they were finished, Bregnest led them to the stables. Are you ready to go? Alex asked Cherie as he settled the saddle on her back. Cherie snorted loudly and stamped her hoof on the floor of the stable in answer. Alex patted her neck and smiled. He was fond of this horse, and being with her again made him feel good. When the company was ready, Bregnest led them out of the stable and into the streets of Telos. Sindar fell in beside Bregnest, while Alex and Halfdan followed them. Andy and Val were last, which made Alex feel a little awkward, because on his last adventure he had always ridden at the back of the group. They traveled south, following the well-marked path to the Great Arch, the magical gateway that would allow them to enter another land. Alex watched the landscape slip by, thinking that it had changed little since he had last been there. Alex thought it felt good to be back in the saddle and riding again. Then, remembering something from his last adventure, he turned to Halfdan. "Did you happen to bring some of that ancient dwarf remedy for stiffness?" Alex asked.
I did,
Replied Halfdan.
and I hope it works as well this time as it did the last time we used it.
"Why wouldn't it?"
It's a new batch.
Halfdan answered.
I'd just finished brewing it when Bregnest's message about this adventure arrived.
"Does the remedy grow more potent with age?"
Oh yes. Truth be told, what you had last time was almost 50 years old.
Halfdan answered.
Takes a long time to get all the ingredients. Some you have to pick in the moonlight, others on the first day of winter. Course, even if you can get everything else, there's always the problem of mugosh berries.
"Mugosh berries?" Andy questioned.
They're very rare,
Halfdan said.
and even if you know where a mugosh plant is, it might take years to harvest the berries. Only plants that are 100 years old produce berries, and even then, they appear only once every 12 to 15 years.
"Perhaps I should learn to brew your potion myself," said Alex in a thoughtful tone. "But I would guess the recipe is a well-guarded secret, and I don't know where I'd be able to find things like mugosh berries."
We do keep the recipe secret,
Halfdan answered seriously.
though that rule might be bent for a wizard like yourself.
Both Alex and Andy laughed at Halfdan's reply. The laughter sounded good in the cool morning air. Alex wondered if all new adventures would be as bittersweet as this one seemed to be. He was happy to be on another adventure, and glad that some of his friends were traveling with him, but he missed the friends who weren't here. They reached the Great Arch easily before midday, and as they filled their water bags and containers, Halfdan prepared a meal. Halfdan's cousin, Thrang, had been the cook on their last adventure together, and he was a good cook. Alex noticed Halfdan's nervous look as they ate, and suspected the dwarf was worried he wouldn't measure up.
Thrang has taught you his secrets.
Bregnest commented, smiling at Halfdan. "Indeed, you are a master cook," Andy added. "Most excellent," said Alex. "Thrang will have a hard time getting his job back." Halfdan bowed, blushing slightly at their comments. Alex smiled, knowing that Halfdan took a lot of pride in his cooking skills and was pleased by their words of praise.
And now, some final instructions before we arm ourselves,
said Bregnest, getting to his feet as they finished eating.
We will follow the standard rules for adventures. If anyone becomes lost, the company will search for the lost person or persons for 13 days. During that time, the lost member or members will also search for the company as best they can. After 13 days, the company will suspend the search and continue toward their final goal, and the lost member will be on his own to do what seems best to him.
Bregnest looked around at his companions, making sure they all understood what he was saying.
I would remind each of you not to speak of our final goal to anyone,
said Bregnest.
The details of our goal are not to be shared, not even with our friends or families in Norseland.
Alex noticed that Andy blushed slightly when Bregnest mentioned family, and he wondered if they would have a chance to meet Andy's family.
I do not think we will run into any trouble between here and Oslensk, but we should arm ourselves and be prepared. Better to be cautious than to be dead,
Bregnest concluded. Once he had finished speaking, they all began taking their weapons out of their magic bags. Alex retrieved both his magic sword, Moonslayer, from his bag, and the true silver dagger that had been given to him on his first adventure. Fastening Moonslayer to his left side and his dagger to his right, he looked around at the rest of the company. Bregnest carried the same weapons as before, a sword at his side, a two-handed sword across his back, and a round shield with a red dragon's head painted on it. Andy carried a round shield along with his other gear, and Halfton's axe had some fancy gold inlay added to the handle, but other than that, their weapons were the same as last time. Val carried a broadsword and a dagger, much like Alex's own. Sindar, however, had a long knife hanging from his belt, and across his back were a pair of scimitars that looked extremely deadly. Sindar also had a helmet of black steel, which Alex saw him return to his magic bag. "Ah," said Sindar, glancing at Alex's weapons. "I see you wear the ancient sword Moonslayer. My people have said much about your sword. I hope that, if time allows, you will show it to me." "Gladly," Alex replied, "but I hope you will not need to see it in battle." "A wise hope," answered Sindar. "Though I must confess, I have wondered if the stories I have heard are true." "I can tell you that they are," Alex replied in a low tone, so only Sindar would hear him. "And though there is something of joy when I use the sword, I would prefer to keep it sheathed." "I understand," said Sindar with a nod. Alex was impressed. There was something about Sindar that reminded him of Archon, but he seemed much older than any other elf Alex had ever met. After storing their water bottles in their magic bags, they mounted their horses once more and rode toward the Great Arch. Alex remembered being disappointed the first time he had seen the Great Arch. He had expected a beautiful stone arch, but it was only two large hills topped with white towers. Andy had explained that the hills were the sides of the arch and the sky was the top, which had only made Alex wonder why it was called an arch at all. As soon as they passed through the arch, the landscape around them changed completely. Now they were riding along a road that cut through a green meadow lined with tall pine trees. There was still a fair amount of snow and ice in the shadows of the trees, but the air was pleasantly warm. "A large company has passed this way in the last day or two," Sindar commented as they rode forward.
"How many do you think?"
Bregnest questioned.
30 or 40 riders, perhaps 5 or 6 pack animals,"
said Sindar.
"No wagons, and nobody was walking with them." "Do you think it might mean trouble?"
Halfton asked, his eyes moving to the trees around them. "There might be traders," said Andy. "A lot of people come to trade for wool in the spring."
"Perhaps," said
Bregnest.
"As they are ahead of us and not following us, I don't think there is anything to worry about."
They moved on without saying anything more. The sun was warm and bright above them, but the occasional gusts of wind were much colder than expected, and Alex wished he had worn heavier clothes. He could tell from the chill in the air that spring had only just arrived and that winter wasn't completely gone. They followed the road south for about an hour before coming to a crossroad. Bregnest halted the company and looked at the 3 pathways before them.
"Well, Andy,"
said Bregnest,
"which of these will lead us to Oslinsk the quickest?"
"The eastern road," Andy pointed. "If we follow it, we will turn northeast and reach Oslinsk in 6 days or less, barring any bad weather."
"Then east we go,"
said Bregnest with a nod. It was obvious that Bregnest had known which way to go, and had asked Andy out of courtesy. Alex tried to remember what Wayland had told him in his letters about courtesy and honor due to people during adventures in their homelands. It had all been interesting at the time, but Alex was finding it difficult now to recall all of the rules for Norseland. He promised himself that he would reread Wayland's letters as soon as he could. They continued to ride until the sun began sinking behind the tall pines. A steady, cold breeze was blowing now, chilling them as they set up their camp. Once everything was in order and Halfton was busy cooking, Alex took the opportunity to show his magic sword to Sindar. An ancient weapon, Sindar commented, looking closely at the sword but not touching it. I have long studied these weapons and their making. I can tell you that Moonslayer was one of the greatest swords ever made by the Dark Elves. Do you know a great deal about the Dark Elves? Alex asked. I do, Sindar answered. Their ways of magic have always been of great interest to me. My own swords are also of their making, though not as old nor as powerful as yours. Can you tell me about Moonslayer and how it was made? I mean, about its power? And how it chooses its master? I can tell you some things, but not all. There are none now alive who know everything about the great swords and how they were made. The knowledge was lost with the Dark Elves then, said Alex sadly. I believe that most of the information was lost, though there are some who say it is not lost, but only forgotten. Do you know how the great swords choose their masters? Alex pressed. I do not, said Sindar in a thoughtful tone. I do not think even the makers of the swords knew how the masters would be chosen. They were foolish to make such swords then, Val commented, looking over Sindar's shoulder at Alex's sword. To make a sword that you cannot use, that is foolish. Perhaps, Sindar agreed. But when the Dark Elves made these weapons, they were made for a specific person or a specific reason. The first masters were known, so making the swords was not foolish. It was when these first masters died or passed on their weapons that the swords began choosing their own masters.
And what would happen if someone the sword had not chosen tried to use it? Val questioned.
If the master were still alive, I believe it would be dangerous for anyone else to use the sword. I think the magic of the sword would turn it against anyone who tried to use it, Sindar answered. If the sword had no master, it might work as a normal sword, without giving its magical powers to the user. I'm not sure.
Did the Dark Elves make other weapons as well? Asked Alex.
Yes, they made all kinds, Sindar answered. Many have been lost or destroyed. I believe that most of the weapons that remain are swords.
Halfton called out that their meal was ready, so Alex put Moonslayer back into its scabbard and accepted a plate of food. He wanted to learn more about his magic sword and the other magical weapons the Dark Elves had made, but he pushed his thoughts aside, thinking that he would have time to ask his questions as they traveled. Will your family be in Oslinsk for the weddings? Alex asked Andy as they ate. Yes, and they are excited to meet you all. My little brother, Michael, seems almost ready to burst with excitement. How old is he? Alex asked. He'll turn 13 the day after the weddings, Andy answered. He keeps hoping I'll buy him his own horse for his birthday.
And will you?
Halfton questioned. I'd like to, but Father isn't happy with the idea, Andy said.
And why would your father be unhappy with such a gift? Questioned Sindar.
Oh, well, Andy began slowly, as if considering his answer. The horse Michael wants is not as tame as the horses we already have. Father thinks it might be too much for Michael to handle. And what do you think? Alex asked. I think Michael will get his wish, said Andy with a sly grin.
Perhaps we should consider getting him a saddle to go with his horse,
said Halfton. Oh no, said Andy, suddenly looking nervous. You don't need to get him a present. That would be too much. Halfton winked at Alex, and Alex understood that he and Halfton would be buying a saddle when the company reached Oslinsk. They finished their meal with a great deal of talk, and they stayed sitting around the fire for a long time. The night was growing colder, but the fire was warm and comfortable. Alex wondered if they should set a watch, but Bregnest said nothing about it.
So tell us about Norseland weddings,
said Halfton as the fire burned down.
What customs should we know about? What kind of gifts should we give?
Andy paused to think. I suppose the most important thing for you to know is that friends of the groom gives gifts to the bride, while friends of the bride give gifts to the groom. Nobody gives gifts to them both? Alex asked.
Andy shook his head.
It's an old custom all over Norseland. Though to be honest, I never asked why nobody gives gifts to both the bride and the groom.
So now we have to find presents for brides we've never met.
Halfton grumbled.
You don't have to give anything expensive or extravagant,
said Andy defensively.
It's more of a thank you for the invitation to the wedding sort of gift.
What type of gifts do strangers give? Sindar questioned.
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't think there's any need for you to give anything,
Andy stuttered. It is a poor wedding guest who gives nothing, said Sindar. Perhaps, when we reach Oslensk, I can learn more about your customs and discover what sort of gift to give. Alex knew that, while Sindar and Val had not been formally invited to the weddings, they would both be included as part of the company in all the feasts and parties that went along with the celebrations.
We had best put blankets on the horses,
said Bregnest as the fire turned to glowing embers.
It may be spring in Norseland, but the nights are still cold.
They all tended to their horses and then went to their tents for the night. Alex was still a little concerned about not setting a watch, but he decided that Bregnest knew what he was doing. Letting his worries drift away in the darkness, he soon fell into a restful sleep. The next morning, Alex was grateful that Halfton had brought along his dwarf remedy for soreness. All his muscles and bones ached when he woke up. Halfton's remedy quickly cured his pains, though it didn't work quite as fast as it had the last time he had used it. Turning, Alex saw Andy tumble over with a surprised yell. Andy had taken the remedy just before Alex, but it appeared that the potion had not worked for him.
I can't feel my left leg,
Andy shouted.
Oh, that's wonderful,
Halfton exclaimed as he rushed to Andy's side.
No failing at all?
What do you mean?
Andy yelled.
My leg won't move at all.
It'll wear off in a few minutes,
Halfton answered with an unconcerned wave of his hand.
Try wiggling your toes, and pay attention to which toe you feel moving first.
What?
This is important, Andy,
Halfton said in excitement.
After drinking from a new batch of potion, if a person loses feeling in part of their body, their fortune can be told by which parts start feeling things first.
You didn't mention anything about losing the use of our body parts before giving us the potion, Val commented with a sour look.
It doesn't happen that often,
Halfton replied, blushing slightly.
To be honest, I didn't think it would happen, but now that it has... Andy, are you wiggling your toes like I said?
How should I know?
Andy snapped.
I can't feel anything.
Well, keep trying. It should only take a minute or two.
Halfton's prediction was correct. After a few minutes, Andy's legs started to move, and before long, he was back on his feet. Halfton continued to ask questions about which toe Andy could wiggle first, but Andy was in no mood to answer.
I'm trying to be helpful,
Halfton finally said.
If you'll tell me which of your toes moved first, I could tell you a lot about your future.
The little one, Andy replied as his anger cooled.
My little toe was the first one I felt. So what can you tell me about my future?
Oh, that's good. That's very good,
said Halfton.
If the little toe moves first, you'll have a long and happy life, filled with good fortune.
What if his big toe had moved first?
Bregnest questioned.
Ah, well, if the big toe moves first, you'll live to a ripe old age and have a happy marriage,
Halfton answered. Do all the toes have something to do with long life and happiness? Sindar questioned.
Now that I think about it, they do,
said Halfton in a serious tone.
Still, it's considered very lucky to have this happen with a new batch of potion.
Lucky that the loss of feeling doesn't last for long, Val commented quietly.
Come,
Bregnest said before Halfton could reply to Val.
We've got places to be and things to do. We can talk about dwarf fortune-telling another time.
The short journey from the Great Arch to Oslensk was a pleasant one. The weather remained fair as they traveled, though the nights continued to be cold. Most mornings there was frost on the ground when they woke up, and Alex knew that Cherie was grateful for the heavy blanket he put on her at night. More than once he thought about conjuring a magical fire to keep everyone warm at night, but he always remembered Waylon's warning about using his powers. Each night after their evening meal, the company would sit around the fire, talking and telling stories of past adventures. Alex was beginning to feel as if he had never gone home at all, but had simply continued his last adventure. On their 6th day away from Telos, Alex and his companions reached the city of Oslensk. Alex was impressed with the city's appearance, even from a distance. Oslensk looked like it had been carved completely from white marble. The large city sat on a hillside and was surrounded by high walls. The white buildings of Oslensk shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, looking both inviting and friendly to travelers. "My father has invited us all to stay with him and the rest of my family," Andy said as they rode toward the city.
Will there be enough room for us all?
Bregnest asked in a slightly worried tone. "Yes," Andy answered. "In fact, he rented a large house where we will be able to stay."
"Then we will accept your father's kindness and give him our thanks,"
said Bregnest.
"I should have told Bregnest that my father is rich,"
said Andy in a lowered voice to Alex.
"After all, he went on many adventures before settling down in Norseland."
"Going on many adventures does not always mean great wealth," Val commented with a sly grin.
"Perhaps not," replied Andy, "but he has always done very well since he retired from his adventures, and I know he can afford whatever we may require."
Alex didn't say anything in reply to Andy's words. He knew that Andy could easily pay for anything they or his family might need. After all, Andy had a huge amount of treasure from their last adventure together, and Alex was sure he hadn't spent very much of it yet. The gates to Oslensk stood open as Alex and his companions rode up to them. The guards at the gates nodded and waved them through without questions. They were apparently expecting many guests to arrive for the upcoming weddings, and they didn't seem to think there was any danger to worry about. As they rode through the narrow and busy streets of Oslensk, Andy joined Bregnest at the front of the company. When they reached the gates of the house Andy's father had rented, Alex saw that it was more of a mansion than a house, with its own stable and gardens inside a high wall. "Welcome to Oslensk," said Andy as they entered the courtyard and climbed off their horses.